Hall & Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Welcome all, and thank you for joining us to experience another Hall & Wilcox private client podcast. It's great to have you with us. In this series, we're focusing on giving and the ways in which it is possible to have an impact in our communities by contributing during your lifetimes and also creating a legacy after you're no longer with us on death. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Peter Winicki. Peter is described as being a generosity and life legacy advisor, which is a wonderful description, and accurately, I think, represents the more than 20-year commitment Peter has made to guiding others to give strategically and impactfully in our communities. Peter has helped establish over 100 philanthropic family foundations, and through various roles has made a significant contribution to philanthropy in Australia. Peter is also the author of a new book, Give While You Live, a practical guide to giving in Australia, which was published just last year. Thank you so very much for taking the time to join me today, Peter.
Oh, it's terrific to see you, Emma.
Now, Peter, maybe we should start at the beginning and go back to what made you choose the giving sector as your career choice. I imagine that it's kind of unlikely that you perhaps left school and said, well, I think I want to join the philanthropic sector. So how did you end up here?
No, I certainly didn't do that, Emma. Look, I fell into commerce. I fell into 8 years of insolvency at Arthur Andersen, if listeners are old enough to remember Arthur Andersen. And then I sort of, again, fell into 8 years of acquisitions at a listed media company. So really enjoyed all of that and learnt a lot. But Emma, I didn't get married till I was 39, so I didn't have any independence for a big chunk of my life. So I would go every winter. I'd go backpacking to low to middle income countries, just to see the world, not to fix the world, or just to get off the tourist trail. And just, I guess, many years of travel, I get to see the growing inequality, and I saw examples of where philanthropy had a bit of an impact in attempting to address some of that inequality. So I guess after a number of years, I was looking for a bit more purpose in my life, and I sort of stumbled into the philanthropic sector about 22 years ago. Managed to get a job at the Myer Foundation, and then very shortly after that set up, I could see the Myer family at that stage had decades of giving experience, and I could see, they'd had some successes and some failures and lots of learning. So I thought, gee, if we could bring some of those learnings to other families, because I had developed this passion for growing the philanthropic sector, that seemed like a pretty good place to start. So I set up the philanthropic services team at the Myer family office.
So when I was reading your book, Peter, I read that both of your grandfathers were knighted for community service. So you've obviously got a history and background in the family of giving. Do you think that influenced you, and do you think that influences how others decide to give?
No, very interesting, Emma. I think it does. I mean, everyone has a different life journey, but for me, I was seeing things at a younger age. I was seeing two sets of grandparents and my parents do various different things for the community. That didn't make me, when I was at sort of secondary school and university, that didn't make me want to go out and attempt to have a positive impact on the world. But I think there's just in the back of the mind, particularly things like seeing my mother's mother, Alice Payton, who had polio her entire life from a very young age, and never complained. And then I would go around to her house and I would see her reading voluminous, dry legal texts so that visually impaired students could study law. And I looked at that, and that sort of stayed with me as a little kid. And then years later, when I'm in the corporate world, enjoying it, but not really having enough purpose, those sorts of issues, I think, Emma, they come out and think, well, I've seen community service. Perhaps that's where I'll find some purpose, which I did.
That's good. Very good. So when you started on this journey to finding greater opportunity to get a purpose in your life, things must have
Mm,
looked really different in the giving or philanthropic sector.
yeah.
Um, what do you think the biggest change between then and now is?
Yeah. Well, 22 years ago, Emma, I mean, the philanthropic sector in Australia was, I mean, it's not big now, but it's much bigger than it was. And back 22 years ago, it was really, the philanthropic sector in Australia was really a bunch of Jewish families, and not much else. And there were Philanthropy Australia, the peak body, had a tiny team. There were very few foundations with staff because the balance sheets of foundations weren't big enough to warrant paying staff. So um, thankfully, the sector has grown a lot in the last 22 years. It's grown nowhere near the level of wealth that's been created in the last 2 decades. But look, it has grown. It's very slowly professionalising. I think a lot of the practices from 2, 3, 4 decades ago are unchanged. There's still a lot of, I think there's still not enough focus with families giving, not enough sort of long-term unrestricted funding. So we've still got a long way to go, but I'm optimistic, Emma. It's heading in the right direction.
That's good. I mean, just picking up, you were saying before we were talking about your family and a history of giving. So you witnessed that, which may or probably influence the way in which you behave. And one of the things I noted in your book, you talk about how people do tend to keep what they do private, and that's fair enough. But obviously, without that visibility, then people haven't got the opportunity to be influenced by the giving or the significant contributions of others. Do you think that's
Yeah.
kind of a particular Australian thing, or is there other
Yeah,
reasons?
look, it's a really important issue, Emma, because if you look at the evidence, we know there are families doing some amazing things in Australia in terms of generosity, and that is growing. But if you look at the evidence, there's a huge weight of evidence that suggests that, look, we could be far more generous as a nation than we currently are. And I think you've just nailed on the head, Emma, with one of the reasons why we don't have enough role models. Very hard to compare us to countries like America, who have had wealth for generations, and most of our wealth has only been created in the last 3 to 4 decades. So for me, it's not surprising that we haven't developed a strong culture of giving, particularly amongst high net worth families. I think we will, but part of that process of getting there is needing a lot more role models. Now, some families, for a variety of reasons, will never talk about their giving, and perhaps that's fine. Um, but I think if we want to get serious about building a really strong giving culture, particularly amongst high net worth families who have got surplus wealth, I think we're going to need influential role models in every state and territory, and multiples of them, standing up and talking about and becoming comfortable with what they're doing. And as some of them start to do that, Emma, it becomes a bit of safety in numbers, and the material giving becomes normalised. I've got no doubt we can get there. I mean, some of your listeners will be aware that the Productivity Commission estimates that in Australia, in the next 2 decades, $3.5 trillion will be passed to the next generation. $3.5 trillion. Now, some experts say, well, actually, no, it's got to be more than that because that's an old number. But if we just stick with the 3.5 trillion, just imagine if we could get just 10%, only 10% of that, 350 billion, gifted to charitable trusts. Those charitable trusts could distribute close to $20 billion a year to the community. Just imagine if that was done effectively. So I think we will need role models to step up and talk about their giving, and then the giving becomes normalised. It's an interesting example. In the States, Steve Jobs, the Apple founder, passed away 10 years ago. Lots of discussion about him. He's a freak. He changed the world. We've all got these Apple products. But in the States, they talked about, well, hang on a second, what did Steve Jobs do for the community? And I gather he shared very, very little of his financial success. So in the States, they marked him down for that. Now, that conversation would never happen in Australia. So we need material giving to become normalised.
Those are like huge numbers that you talk about. And I
Mm,
think from my experience and conversations I've had, I think there's a massive misconception. People think that Australians are a lot more generous than they actually are on the real dollars.
yeah,
And some of our biggest givers are not originally or aren't Australians. So biggest givers in this community aren't
yeah,
Australians. So yeah, I think
yeah,
I'd agree with you. There's a long way to go, and
yeah,
the expectation is that we will get there. But perhaps
yeah,
I don't know why we're particularly slow at building that culture of giving. Um, but it's good to hear that you, being an expert here and with the experience that you've had, are optimistic about the growth prospects in this area in the philanthropic sector. So
yeah. And
that is a bit of
just
good
another,
news.
yeah, and another comment I'll just add there, Emma, that I'm seeing, and hopefully you are too. I'm seeing more and more families having a deeper conversation with each other around, well, how much is enough, and how much do the kids need? I mean, I've sat with families who've actually calculated, well, how much is enough? Because when high net worth families do that calculation, often there's a bit of a surprise on, well, actually, we need X and we've got 10X. So then the letting go becomes a bit easier. And part of that conversation, of course, is how much do the kids need? I mean, we could transform the size of the philanthropic sector overnight if families stopped leaving significant sums to their children. Now we know that's a very personal issue, and that's not for everybody. And there's no right and wrong answer to that. But we also know that we get our self-esteem from our achievements in life, and we all need to learn to work. We need to fail and succeed and build resilience. And I think that my view is that's not aided by significant income streams being passed to the next generation.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's the economics of enough is a major part of that conversation to understand what is
Yeah,
enough. And
yeah,
conversations across families that you touch upon there is that you need to have a conversation across families to start thinking about this. And
yes,
in my view, and I expect you share this, that you can't start early enough or young enough to try and
yeah,
create that culture of giving, not just in the community, but within individual families.
yeah,
And
yeah,
education around that can also be useful for education generally, can't
yeah.
it?
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence, Emma, that says if kids learn to give when they're young, they give more when they're older, I touch on that in my book. We're not a high net worth family, but we started with wife and I have got two teenage boys now. But when they were little, we started with a money box with the 3 slots, and they were back in the days when we had coins, Emma.
Hmm.
They were given $3 when they were little, and $1 had to go into the save, and one had to go into the spend, and the final dollar had to go into the share. Which immediately raised conversations around, that's mine. Why don't I need to share it? And it
Absolutely.
was, it was, but
Horrifying.
yeah, that's right. And as I'm having this debate with my 5-year-old, I'm thinking, I'm having the same conversation with people who've got a bit more experience than he does. But it's as you say, if we can educate young people, then it becomes normalised. And I think something, Emma, that we
So
don't
like
talk.
habitual, even habitual.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. It's
mm,
normalised. It becomes a habit. It's like we're not good at payroll giving, but if it's done on a monthly basis, people don't even know it's gone.
mm.
But I think, Emma, that's something that we don't talk enough about in Australia, which is slowly starting to change, is the incredible educational tool a family foundation can be for the next generation, and the kids and the grandchildren. When a family foundation is basically a microcosm of a business, it just happens to be in the business of grant making and other things such as impact investing for social good. So the learnings are immense. I mean, whether you've got a family's got a sub fund with $50,000 in it, or something like a private ancillary fund with 2 or 5 or 10 or 20 million, whatever the number is, it's got finite resources. So the first thing that the kids are learning about is investment strategies. Well, how are we going to invest here to maximise the mission of the foundation? So that would include conversations around impact investing as well as normal investing. Hopefully they're overlapping. And then, okay, we've set that investment strategy. That's good. What are we going to do with this vehicle? What's our vision? What's our mission? What's our family as a collective unit? What are we passionate about? And best practice. When I work with families, is encouraging them. There's no right and wrong answer. But encouraging families to pick one or two areas that they're passionate about, and then developing a giving strategy around those focus areas. Whether the family's interested in climate change or First Nations Australians or early childhood development, whatever the issue is, develop a plan for maximising your impact there, and then implementing the plan and measuring the impact of the family foundation, meeting with really smart for-purpose leaders. I mean, the learnings are enormous, and none of that's easy, but it's actually great fun. It's really satisfying for family members as a collective unit to target some of these issues. So I think if we can talk more about those sorts of issues, we can encourage families and inspire more high net worth families to think about, well, we've got to have one of these. This sounds fantastic. Enormous learnings for the kids and the grandchildren here.
I think that's that idea of it being fun and enjoyable. It's when you talk about philanthropy with people, quite often it's something quite somber and depressing, because you're trying to deal with perhaps the wickedest things in the world. But it can actually be really enjoyable to see impact, and therefore inspiring for younger people.
Absolutely. And there's an American author who says life shouldn't be about the acquisition of wealth. It should be the acquisition of memories. And if you want to build lifelong memories with your family, this is one of the better ways to do it, because it's, as you say, it's not easy, because you're tackling wicked problems on some occasions, difficult issues, but it's immensely satisfying, particularly as a collective unit, to try and have a crack at these.
Yeah, and as you say, there's the huge education advantage, because not only are we building those habits, we're bringing it out into the open and normalising this and role modelling it, but also educating next generations how to manage what they have. So if they're going to inherit wealth, whether that's significant or not, they need to have the tools to do that. So they need to be confident in taking advice. They need to be confident in challenging and questioning impact, whether that's with their investment advisors, their accountant, but also in the communities that they're looking to give. So I'd agree that having conversations early and encouraging family, even really small scales, you're saying with your own children, that can have an influence. So if we've got a situation where we don't have large percentage of wealth transitioning, or the large percentage of wealth that is transitioning, and very little of that is going to end up in our communities, perhaps this generation is going to be the one that's going to drive that. But I'm kind of interested also in your view of how younger people are likely to give in the future, because you've had experience in family foundations, in people like the My Family and other organisations. Do you think that people see that as the way that they want to give, future generations want to give, in those sort of foundation type structures, or differently?
Interesting, Emma. Some will and some won't. And as we know, it's very hard to generalise about anybody or anything, let alone generations. But I mean, traditionally, a foundation's been established and it's set up in perpetuity, and on it goes. And there are some advantages of perpetuity. I think you and I in the past have talked about Chuck Feeney, the Irish American, who created $8 billion and gave it away in his lifetime through his foundation, Atlantic Philanthropies. He was an advocate of giving while living, and I, in my book, I attribute that saying to him, give while you live. One of his lines is, why would you leave the fun and satisfaction of giving your wealth to somebody else when you're gone? Get on with it, give while you live. So I think generally, Emma, the next generation will be less interested in setting up perpetual foundations. I think there are very few limited life foundations in Australia, i.e. it's got limited life, so the foundation's going to close in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 20 years' time, or at the end of the next generation, whatever the case may be.
So less of a drip feed, more of an impact.
That's right, Emma. There are a number of large foundation in Australia who are perpetual foundations, and they're targeting climate change. Strikes me as a little bit unusual that one wouldn't stop and think that, gee, if you believe the climate science, which is overwhelming in its evidence, we need to address it now, not in 150 years' time. So why would you drip feed money to it? So I think the next generation will be more bring in the new and out with the old, and there'll be a lot more limited life foundations, which I think is a good thing. Let's get on with it. And then future generations can create wealth to solve future problems that we're not aware of today.
Well, let's hope. Let's hope so.
Yes, that's right.
Just coming back to looking at some statistical information, one of the things that I've read, and I read also in your book, is about the limited amount of people that consider leaving money in their will. So we've talked a bit about lifetime giving and the importance of that, and obviously that's the name of your book. But in our practice, we're helping people transition wealth and put in place documentation to give effect to their wishes. But your information says that under 10% of people actually include any sort of bequest or gift in their will, even $1,000 or $100 to an organisation to help our communities. Why do you think that is? What's your view on why? So, I mean, similar, I suppose, to the questions about that normalising and culture of it, but why particularly not when you're no longer around? You don't need it anymore then.
Yeah. I think because giving hasn't been normalised in one's lifetime, in most people's lifetime. I mean, we know that most people don't claim a gift to a deductible gift recipient in their tax return each year. Most people don't do that, so they're not giving in their lifetime. And not everyone's. We know that everyone doesn't have the capacity to give large sums, but we're talking about small sums as well. So we don't. Even with mums and dads who have got a little bit of surplus, leaving aside high net worth families, we're not normalising giving. Again, it comes back to we don't have enough role models. We go to our dinner parties. We don't talk about giving. We talk about the property market.
We definitely don't talk about dying either, Peter. So
no. Well, you know that better
and
than
money
I.
we need to talk about more. Perhaps that will encourage people.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's not normalised. And again, some people don't have the surplus wealth to give in their lifetime, and that's why, as you say, they can give via their will. But it's not normalised. So,
But it's also the information that's available about the number of people who actually do prepare a form of will or document the transition of wealth. Even people with significant sums quite often die without good documentation or good plans in place, and so they're missing the opportunity to do that. There's been some research about why it is that people don't consider this to be a necessity, is to get themselves in shape to die, and it's not because of the cost or the complexity of doing that. Most of the reasons, I understand from research that's come out of Queensland University of Technology, is it's emotional issues. So having to navigate those difficult family and emotional issues holds people back from not only doing documentation, but therefore not having counsel to give.
Yeah. So I think that can be assisted if you've got some sort of structured giving throughout your lifetime. Whether that means you're a high net worth family with a private ancillary fund with significant funds in it, or whether you've got more modest wealth and you've got a $50,000 sub fund with a community foundation, or whether you can't afford any of the above, that's fine. You're giving, as we do, our family, modest sums to a school in Tanzania to sponsor a couple of kids through their education. If you're doing, as long as you're doing something that's normal, it's happening on a monthly basis. I think then as you get older and think, okay, I need to get I'm into my 40s or 50s or whatever you probably say earlier, Emma, I need to get my affairs in order. How's my will looking? Okay, now that I'm looking at my will, well, of course, because I've normalised giving in my life, how do I structure that in my will?
Yeah, and there's lots of ways to do that, even straight gift within the will, or creating or adding to existing foundations. There's so many options. And one of our other sessions in this series, we'll talk about the different options available to people. So I encourage listeners and advisors to look out that and consider the different options that are available to give. So Peter, we've talked a bit about the inhibitors to giving, whether that's people's not talking about it, communication, education in the community around that, and the lack of role models to look to and to encourage giving. Is there anything in our community or perhaps in our systems of politics or otherwise that might be holding us back, do you think?
Yes, Emma, I think Philanthropy Australia is the peak body. They do a reasonable job. I think they need to go back to their core focus of more and better giving. That's the reason they were established. I think they get distracted with other issues. Get back to your core business, and part of that process is, I mean, as you implied, Emma, a key part in this process is advisors, lawyers, accountants, financial planners, being aware of the simple process of different types of philanthropic structures, such as private ancillary funds and public ancillary sub-funds. I mean, they're not difficult. I'm surprised more advisors don't have access to some sort of philanthropic resource. It's going to happen. It's interesting that when the wealth creators pass away, often funds which are being managed are moved to another firm, another body, because the next generation never met the wealth advisors. So I think, and of course, one of the best ways to get to know the next generation is via a family foundation. If you're managing the money in the family foundation, you're meeting the next generation on at least a quarterly basis as you're reporting on the investment returns, and then if you're smart enough, you can work out a way to stay in the room when some of the more interesting discussions are, the mission of the foundation. So I think that's, I write about this in the book. I think it's a key place for wealth advisors to think, okay, we need to think more around sort of a holistic view of wealth, not just creating and maintaining and preserving wealth, but what's a more constructive use of it for the family. I think that I see that as will be a major driver of the growth of philanthropy. Is I'm seeing clients pushing wealth advisors now on these sorts of issues, and some of which we discussed earlier. How much is enough? How much do the kids need? What are these foundation structures? What would suit us?
So advisors, Peter, that don't skill themselves up or understand the importance of this are going to be left behind, because it's going to be a big thing in the future of families.
It is, and it's weight in high net worth land, Emma. It's weight of money. There's so much wealth that's being created, and I'm seeing more evidence than I've ever seen in the last 20 years of families, as we talked about earlier, thinking of a more constructive use of their wealth. So they're going to need some help on that and some advice. None of it's rocket science. It's simple to get across this, and the advisors that are on top of this issue, they're going to. There's a couple already occurring. They're getting a strong name in the market for focusing on a more holistic use of wealth, purpose of wealth, and which includes philanthropic structures.
Yeah, so you get that better connection with the current generation who are controlling the decisions, and certainly build a relationship into next generations, because you're tapping into what's important to them as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
Absolutely.
And you can share some of the advantages and benefits of a family foundation, as we talked about earlier. The educational tool it can be for the foundation. If they're sharing that, they'll excite the family, and then there's a far greater chance the family will be retained as a client once the wealth creators pass.
Yeah, absolutely. So Peter, we started at the beginning with where you started in the philanthropic sector and your progress through that and experience. What's next for you? What are you looking to do?
Yeah, well, as you said earlier, the book came out at the end of last year, and I've been really privileged to work with some really smart people. So in the philanthropic sector, so I wanted to share those learnings. And then now I'm the next decade, I'm starting to work with families now on the high level. They're developing their giving strategy, running philanthropic vision workshops for families, getting them to do the thinking around their individual values, their family values, their aspirations, the foundation. to get them inspired to start their philanthropic journey. And then also other families I've known, I'm starting to do some strategy reviews to make sure, they've been running the foundation for a number of years, but it's not quite hitting the mark. So, okay, what's going on here? Let's have a review and get them on the right track to more and better giving. And I'm pretty excited. I mean, I'm late 50s, Emma, and I'm pretty keen to that. This is my passion, teaching families about best practice giving, getting them excited about, the opportunities the foundation can be for the entire family. So I'm pretty privileged that, that's where I think I can maximize my impact. So that's where I'm going to spend my time.
Well, that is absolutely great to hear, because I think there's a lot of things that people say, well, someone should be doing something about that. And you are really a person that is doing and also rallying in others into being people that will be those someone. So
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. It's
Thanks,
been
Emma.
a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I encourage listeners to get a hold of Peter's book, which, as I said, can be sourced through his website, and the details of which will be available on our website and in the show notes for this podcast. Thank you again, listeners, and we look forward to you joining us again soon for more private client conversations.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.